Hello and welcome to Dialogue, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Yang Rui. A public spat between Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba and the SAIC has concluded, with both sides agreeing to enhance communication and explore models for managing the online market. Will this incident, which was spurred by an unofficial SAIC report accusing Alibaba of hosting counterfeit products, encourage stricter regulations on the e-commerce market? What are the potential risks in this emerging industry, and how should they be managed? Meanwhile, Alibaba is now facing lawsuits in both China and the United States for allegedly having provided false information prior to listing on the New York Stock Exchange. How can Chinese companies listed overseas improve their governance? To answer these questions, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Mr. Charles Liu, founder of How Capital, and Mr. Edward Lehman, managing director of Lehman, Li and Xu. Before we start the interview, let's look at this. It all started with a survey conducted by the State Administration for Industry and Commerce accusing Alibaba's online shopping platforms of selling fake and substandard goods. The giant quickly hit back, dismissing the allegations as unfair. As the two went back and forth for a few rounds, Alibaba put out a weaker-than-expected sales growth in its quarterly report. Net profits plunged 28% year-on-year to $964 million. These developments weighed on Alibaba's shares, which suffered a sharp crash, losing more than $30 billion of market value. Meanwhile, 5 U.S. law firms were reportedly investigating possible securities frauds involving Alibaba in wake of the allegations. But all of a sudden, to the surprise of global observers, a resolution was reached. The agency clarified that the report criticizing Alibaba was not an official document and thus was without legal weight. Both sides agreed to work together to promote the healthy and orderly development of e-commerce in China. Counterfeiting has long been a big problem for China's e-commerce market. Experts caution that the incident should serve as a wake-up call for the whole industry, especially for ambitious companies like Alibaba.
The problem of counterfeit goods and so on is real. So it is a problem that I think Alibaba is not particularly, I can't really say that they're being targeted as if it is unfairly, because there are problems. And once these problems affect so many people in China, I'm sure that the government, out of fear of, disrupting its stability and so on, will have to act and tell this big company to try to clean up.
Welcome, Jack Ma.
During this year's Davos conference, Ma outlined his ambitious plan to take Alibaba beyond China and turn it into a global e-commerce platform.
If we can help a Norway small business can sell things to Argentina, and Argentina consumers can buy things online from Switzerland, and we can build up which I called, I don't know, maybe not right word, EWTO.
But to achieve this grand vision, sales growth will be only one of the many factors in play. Jack Ma will have to start a house-cleaning campaign to rebuild Alibaba's reputation and foster confidence of its investors. Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. Do you think Taobao, the most popular online market of Alibaba, has been treated fairly?
Well, I think with Xi Jinping's initiative that the enforcement of the law, rule of law, I think that all companies, whether they're large or small, should be treated equally. And the SAIC had come out with a notice on June 12th, 2014, that they were going to initiate this campaign, and they went ahead and initiated the campaign.
Excuse me, first of all, do you think the problem of counterfeiting for Alibaba and in fact for Taobao is real?
Yeah, I think it is real. I mean, if anyone who's been on there, have a look, see at it. It's apparent. I mean, right now under the new trademark law rule, Section 56 and 75. I mean, those that initiate or assist in some way infringement are also liable or secondarily liable. So I mean, under the laws and regulations, I think that it's not enough to have actual knowledge. You can have constructive knowledge, which means that anyone who would look at it would say this might be an infringing product. So I do think it's a real and it's a legitimate concern.
Charles, how do you look at the impact of this public spat?
I think going back to your question of whether or not it was fair, Whether or not problems exist, yes, they exist, and they exist rampantly. So as a result, I wouldn't put it as fair or not fair, but the impact is great because it sounds a warning to all those who are engaged in this rapidly expanding market. This has become probably the most exciting market in the world in terms of e-commerce. And the rapid growth, of course, has brought about also quite a bit of problems, and this sounds a warning to behave more properly.
Due to the outbreak of this public spat between SAIC and Taobao, Alibaba, up to $30 billion have evaporated overnight. I mean, this is a huge loss for Alibaba. Now, how could Jack Ma, founding father of this giant, reflect upon this issue?
Well, I think he's going to find himself in a brave new world. So, I mean, when people go public, oftentimes I think Chinese companies say, well, we've grabbed the legs of God, we've gone public, we're raising equity. But I don't think they understand fully what it means to be fully compliant and be fully transparent and be able to tell the public everything that's been disclosed to them. And so this is the issue. The issue is with stock fraud or stock manipulation. By not disclosing the SAIC's discovery or discussion with them, it's made problems.
Charles, do you think this is a constant problem with those Chinese companies which want to get listed in overseas stock exchange markets?
It is a problem. It is the style here is very different from that of New York, and I think one of the things is also.
Excuse me, first of all, before you answer this question, why was Alibaba rejected by the Hong Kong Stock Exchange?
Because they wanted to have a very unusual structure, which Hong Kong Stock Exchange.
Are you talking about the partnership?
The partnership and the ownership of the partnership and how the company is to be managed and disclosure to the public as well. It becomes a private company in a public market, in effect.
Excuse me, but the understatement of my question actually refers to whether those guys in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange had discovered some problems and therefore they rejected the deal.
That's not for either you and I to comment on. Mm-hmm. But I think in terms of the foreign market, I think this is just one example of how there has been quite a bit of China bashing over the years, starting with Sino-Forest and so on. But there is another angle to it. One, investment bankers would talk about how China should really become more compliant with international corporate governance and so on. But there's also the angle of, I think, hedge funds making plays, attacking companies. There is a company, Shanghai company, that was listed in New York 2 years ago and is doing exceedingly well and it's very profitable. And then some unknown hedge fund started to write bad things against it, and share price fell by 40%. So the owners decided, okay, we take it private. We delist from NASDAQ. We come back and relist in either Shanghai or Hong Kong. And in fact, we call it our valuation arbitrage. They end up giving 200% more to the value of their shares by doing that. Same thing has happened. There's another one called Spectrum. There's another one called Omnivision. All these are billion-dollar companies that's delisting from NASDAQ because of a distorted view of the Western investment world over many Chinese companies. But in terms of Alibaba, I think the whole structure of what they were trying to create in terms of something very different, the partnership agreement and so on, is really to have a private company but listed to capture a lot of cash, unfortunately.
But Edward, what does the American law say about the violation of the law?
Well, again, I mean, I think that we have 1.3 million American lawyers. China has about 200,000, okay, and 80% of them got their law license in Chinese in the last 5 years.
I want my son to be a lawyer.
Well, and so these 1.3 million lawyers are looking for clients, and they're trying to make up clients when there aren't any, in a class action lawsuit, which is what this is. It's K. Hunt versus Alibaba, and it's in the Southern District of New York, in the Federal District Court. And what they've done is they found Mr. K. Hunt, and he starts the initiation. They certify a class of 30 people, and then there's a class of all the people who have bought stocks from October 21st to January 28, 2015, from 2014 to 2015, and then anyone who is in that class can seek damages. And so these lawyers, there are 5 different law firms, I should say, have brought this action, and they're saying that there was not full disclosure. And I think they have a genuine case. I really do. And I think that in going back to what Charles was saying, in Hong Kong, in Shanghai, there isn't not a very strong plaintiffs bar, which means that the group of lawyers who bring class action lawsuits, or class actions are not, they call them class actions here, but they're not permitted. You have to name everyone in the class. In America, you do not. So the plaintiffs bar is not very strong, and so as a result, you can have companies that we talked about with the Hong Kong companies that have these sort of alter egos with partnerships and other types of things. I mean, I'm not saying that would be the case, but the plaintiffs bar coming forward as a shareholder derivative suit is very small compared to here.
Let me raise a follow-up question on the consequences arising from the current public spat, particularly allegations that 5 law firms from the U.S. Will sue Alibaba in what is called a class action. Now, Charles, many observers say there must be a strong relationship between Alibaba and the Chinese government. If that was to be true, why did SAIC go as far as to create such a media fanfare that's so devastating for the reputation of Alibaba, which is a flagship online giant, which has enjoyed many preferential policies of the government? This is a wake-up call, of course. This is something positive. But on the other hand, this is a heavy loss. Many housewives would prefer to turn to JD.com instead of Taobao from now on.
Yeah. I think, first of all, it's not a Chinese company. It is principally owned by foreign entities like Yahoo.
That is a strong note of irony.
Yeah, it is owned. Its principal shareholders is a investment fund in Japan and Yahoo.
Let's look at this issue of overseas fund. Without their enormous support, I don't think the IT industry would have enjoyed such a development in leaps and bounds.
Right. Absolutely.
So they deserve credit.
They deserve credit. So whether or not they are a Chinese company with special relationship to the Chinese government, I think is questionable. That's number one. Number two, the attack, if you have it, by the Chinese government relevant authorities, I think is also in response to a lot of complaints, because there have been many complaints by consumers. There have been a lot less complaint against some of the others, like JD.com and so on. So the Chinese government, when they receive, especially of late, when the Chinese government is becoming more responsive to the population, they are responding to complaints by the consumers.
Now, Edward, why do you think a representative of Taobao complained that the survey conducted by SAIC was seriously flawed in its logic?
Well, I mean, I understand their viewpoint.
Because they say that seriously contradicts the previous data.
Right. I mean, any time you look at it, anyone who would take an analysis, I mean, there probably is not a large enough sample. So one argument from the Taobao could be, well, this is not a large enough sampling, and so we can't be clear that this is indeed the case. We've only seen a very small part of the product. On the other hand, the regulators can say, even with this small amount, the number is outrageous, and as a result, something should be done about it. But I'm not sure that's the complete issue. Not only with regards to counterfeit products, I also think that, and this is what Charles was touching on, is the anti-competitive behavior of which the platform is acting for the retailers. And so these kinds of issues haven't really been brought so much to the public at this point in time, which is they own the platform, they can manipulate who can get these kind of benefits and who are supervised, promoted, and also the regulations. can be prohibitive to have unfair competition. So I think and AIC is also in charge of that as well. I mean, the NDRC is with anti-monopoly, but also this anti-competitive behavior is AIC.
Yes, AIC's sample test showed that only 37.25% of surveyed commodities sold on Taobao were authentic. Taobao fired back, saying that the authority had only made a sample of 51 items, which cannot represent the enormous trade volume on the platform. Well, thank you very much. I have to leave you there for the moment. You are watching Dialogue with Mr. Charles Liu and Mr. Edward Lehman. We're discussing the latest quarrel between Alibaba and SAIC, the online shopping watchdog in China. But it seems both sides have agreed to soft pedal the issue. Maybe a compromise may have been made behind the curtain. We'll come back in a short while and discuss these and other issues. Please stay with us. Welcome back, gentlemen. Now, if one e-commerce player like Alibaba, and of course we are talking about Taobao, has been so dominant on the center stage, of course many other competitors would love to steal the spotlight, and they want to break up the monopoly. Now, do you think the latest survey conducted by SAIC, the watchdog, is based on complaints from customers who say enough is enough? What do you think?
Well,
some companies were investigated, and one publicly listed company, the chairman and principal owner, was cooking the books for 3 years. He was fined 400,000 RMB. But how much profit he had taken in by cooking the books. So when the threshold is very low, I think it's an issue of creating the right legal framework, enforcing the courts to impose very, very serious fines and jail term for people who do these things. Otherwise, it's just too easy.
Right.
So SAIC should deserve credit for singling out the flagship of e-commerce, namely Alibaba, for whatever you call it, a wake-up call or a punishment. Obviously, compromise has been made to soften the tone on both sides, perhaps in an attempt to encourage development of the burgeoning e-commerce in China, which may create a sufficient number of jobs for young university graduates, because that's a political issue, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it is.
Liu Keqiang.
Well, and I certainly think, I mean, SAIC has to be commended for enforcing the law. I mean, but I mean, everyone should enforce the law, and everyone should be equal before the law. And I think, again, this is a rule of law issue, and I think it's great that they've come forward with it.
Excuse me, the watchdog itself is put aside at this moment, Edward and Charles. In a discussion at the World Internet Conference in November, Zhejiang, Ma Yun, Jack Ma said, sellers of fake goods are afraid to sell their products on Taobao. He said so proudly in front of the public and said, those who did violate the laws and regulations could be easily tracked down. But was he serious? I mean,
was that when was that? Was that pre-IPO?
After IPO.
Yeah, that's right.
After
in November.
I
mean, given the reputation and the prestige of such a person like Jack Ma, how could he? Have such a poor awareness about the consequences. I mean, going public in New York is not a piece of cake. It means a single slight exposure of the fakes could ruin the reputation of Alibaba. That's way expensive. That's way beyond what he can afford.
I don't think he's unaware of what is going on. It's been going on.
That's even worse.
Exactly, and I think it's been going on for quite some time. And just people that I know personally, including my family, has bought on Taobao and have gotten fake products, or products that were supposed to be certain branded products. But sometimes, people buy this knowing they're fake because they're a lot cheaper. So
already, Alibaba is paying a heavy price, given the nosedive of its profits. Alibaba's troubles continue. Its fourth quarter report indicated that Alibaba's net profit dropped 28% over the past year. The company lost $11 billion in market value last Wednesday and is now facing lawsuits in both China and the U.S. I'm sorry for this, for the uphill battle that he's fighting with great difficulties. How do you estimate the consequences in the next stage of the lawsuit?
Well, I certainly think he's got enough money to defend it. So, I mean, in America...
But that doesn't excuse him from the serious...
No. In America, a lot of times, it's how much justice can you afford, as we've seen oftentimes. So, the next stage of the lawsuit is going to be a certification of the class, which is going to happen around March 31st, which is, I think, a hearing date in the Southern District of New York. It's going to be a long battle. I mean, there's no question about it. And I think that he's going to come back and have a decent set of lawyers to be able to counter it. There are a lot of issues, like I said. I think part of it is the naivete with which he might have said the comment in November. I don't think it was said maliciously. I think that dealing with this kind of public exposure is a very difficult thing to do in a place where you have to have full disclosure to your documentation and who you met with prior to the IPO. So, I mean, he's just going to have to adjust.
There's one very important aspect here. He's dealt a lot with investors. He has not dealt a lot with regulators. There's a big difference between saying very nice things to investors versus what you say in the eyes of the regulator. This is where, I don't want to be totally cynical to say that, he's fully aware of this and said this.
What bitter lessons can other Chinese companies draw from this wake-up call? I mean, isn't it a devastating blow for the Chinese concept?
I whether or not it's a devastating blow, it's really hard to say, because I think it's actually good for Chinese companies who have problems to be exposed as having problems.
Charles, it's an issue of the investors' confidence.
That's right. However, the companies that I named have delisted from New York, are doing extremely well, either in Shanghai or Hong Kong. So if you're good, you're good. If you're bad, you're exposed. And I hope American investors in particular, can become a little more sophisticated in determining what is good and what is bad out of the Chinese companies. Same thing can be said for American companies or other companies from other countries, right? It is China bashing, which was most prominent about a decade ago, is no longer what it is today, because you now have some very, very fantastic Chinese companies out there. Xiaomi is shocking everybody. Yeah. Lenovo's doing well.
Shocking to everybody except for Dou Mingzhu.
Well, she's a legend in her own right. but others, other Chinese companies are also doing very, very well. Okay, Huawei, Wanda, and the others. So I think the market has to learn to decipher the difference between good and bad. But of course, because it's China, it's very far away, and the cultural differences, it just takes a lot longer.
Now, Edward, twice Charles came up with the wording of China bashing in terms of the going public issue. Do you agree?
Well, America always needs an enemy. Okay, whether it was the Soviet Union, whether it was Japan at one point in time.
We're talking about the Cold War.
Well,
or the military-industrial complex, a phrase coined by Eisenhower in the 1960s, perhaps.
No, I agreed. And to a certain extent, domestic politicians in the United States often like to point the finger somewhere else, that the reason we're in, the trouble we're in, the issues that we have are because somebody else has made it happen for us. So it's just maybe China's term, like you were saying, Charles, I think it was 10 years ago that was pretty much in vogue. I think now
that's an image of a cowboy leg.
You can remember the book in 1999, the oncoming collapse of the Chinese economy. And then in the last 6 or 7 years, the hedge fund guys, I won't name them, are just doing China bashing. What do? They short Chinese stock.
Correct.
And then they bash China.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. No, I'm not appreciative of the China bashing campaign, be it the presidential campaign or going public in New York. Thank you very much for your participation. With that, we come to the end of this very interesting discussion about Alibaba. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.